Hey class, we are going to keep talking about plants, but we're going to shift gears here and talk about the anatomy and physiology of plants and plant growth. Bits and pieces of chapters 35 through 37. And this first bit, we're going to tackle plant physiology and plant anatomy and physiology. Plant growth is next. As far as your just kind of third grade lesson here in plants as far as their structure. Now, again, we learned about the groupings of plants, so this is kind of a typified plant. Not all plants have these, but you have roots, which anchor the plant, shoots, which is like the middle part of the plant to support the leaves, and a vascular system, which transports water, sugar, nutrients throughout the plant itself. And then soil is where the plant obtains its nutrients as well as anchor the plant. So you have a shoot system and you have a root system. This is an overview as far as the basic kind of ins and outs of the machinery of plants. It's kind of hard to know where to start because there's so much here that is important. You see, okay, we'll start here with that vascular tissue with the xylem sap and the phloem sap. Which is in, the xylem sap is in yellow, blue, and the phloem sap is in green. So the phloem sap is carrying nutrients and the products of photosynthesis from the leaves, as you see up at the top of the tree. You have photosynthesis that takes place, bringing in carbon dioxide through the stomata of the leaves, and then converting that to sugar, carbohydrates, glucose, releasing that as oxygen. That travels throughout the plant through phloem sap, but you also have phloem sap that brings up, like when you have plants that are trying to grow in the spring, and you have all of that energy that's stored in the roots or the stems as starch, breaks it down into glucose, that brings that energy throughout the plant. So you see phloem sap is a two-way street here. And then you have xylem that brings water and minerals that it absorbs from the soil up to the rest of the plant. As far as what pulls that plant, the water up, is kind of a vacuum effect caused by its transpirational pool from the loss of water through the leaves. It actually is the driving force that brings those water and that nutrients from the roots back up to the top of the tree through that xylem sap, right. Now you have some tissue systems, which we'll talk about more so when we talk about primary and secondary growth. You have the epidermis, which is the skin, of the plant, just like it would be in an animal. You have the vascular tissue system, which is xylem and phloem, and then you have the ground tissue system. And again, we're going to kind of touch more on that when we talk in the next lecture about plant growth. Just a wee bit here about soil. Now, soil, at least topsoil, is organic. It is composed of inorganics like very finely crushed rock and stone, but mixed in with that is decayed material, bacteria. You have invertebrates here. You have actually vertebrates as well. This is where the plant receives its nutrients. And this is where what we say the rhizosphere, that part of the soil that is bound to the plant's roots, that enable those roots to actually uptake the nutrients that it needs. Now, this is a list. I'm not going to go through these one by one, but this is a list of those macronutrients as well as those micronutrients that are necessary for a plant to grow optimally. And some, as you see, are extremely specific. Like, for instance, if we look down, we see copper, and copper is a component of many redox and lignin biosynthetic enzymes. Now, it's a micronutrient, not much is needed, but it is something that is essential for plant growth. So soil needs all of these things in order to grow plants. And sometimes we might think or confine our thinking to agricultural fields, but we're talking about the plants that are growing just in nature, not just your lawn, but like in wooded areas and fields need all of these nutrients as well. And the roots of those plants, of course, serve to anchor the plant as well. And so you wind up having roots that can be somewhat modified in order to allow this to occur, in addition to maximizing the amount of water and nutrients that it is able to bring up. Like just an interesting aside, like for instance, you have nematophores, which are prop roots. You have prop roots and pneumatophores. Prop roots are roots that help anchor the plant above the ground, like corn has prop roots. Pneumatophores are those roots that are above the water in those coastal areas that have mangroves, the mangrove trees. They're above water because you need gas, oxygen as a gas absorbed into the roots, which can't happen in the soils in which they grow because that sandy mud that these grow in is very anoxic or lacks of oxygen, and so they have these pneumatophores in order to absorb the oxygen that they need. Now we'll see this in lab really as far as all of the different parts of the roots. You see the vascular tissue there in the middle, the xylem and the phloem. The root hairs are essential. They're just little lateral extensions of the root for absorption. You do have absorption through parts of the epidermis. The cortex is this central cylinder where this is where you're going to store most of your starch. A Casparian strip, that is really interesting. It's a band of cell wall material that prevents some substances there as far as the endodermis. Out of the pericycle come lateral roots, and then you have the stele, the central part of the root, which includes that vascular tissue. As far as obtaining nitrogen, now nitrogen is a limiting nutrient for plants in that is considered a limiting nutrient in that nitrogen is essential for plant growth, yet there's very, very little of it in the soil, which why we say it's a limiting nutrient, and without it a plant is limited in its ability to grow. And as mentioned in earlier lectures, that the plant can't assimilate nitrogen as it is in the soil, and so it's necessary for, we talked about this with mycorrhiza. Now the example you see here is bacteria, is you have bacteria and different fungal species that actually break nitrogen down into ammonia compounds, where it is then able to be assimilated by the root hairs of the plant. And interestingly enough, you have denitrifying bacteria as well, that if you have, when we talk about biogeochemical cycling in ecosystems, you have to have nitrogen put back into the atmosphere. Most of our atmosphere is nitrogen, and you have bacteria that then build up that leftover nitrates from and build them back up into atmospheric oxygen and get released as well. It's a really fascinating relationship that we have with bacteria and fungus in the soil. As far as the shoots of plants, you have, like, this is the main stem, I guess, or the word that we're mostly used to using with this part of the plant. Although we refer to the stem as just actually just a part of a major part of the shoot system. Where the leaves are attached is called the node. Of course, your leaf is your photosynthetic organ of the plant. Between those nodes are called internodes. Axillary buds, where the leaves attach to the stem, you may have a branch form from them, where the apical bud is the top, the tip. Then this is what you have when you lengthen the height of the plant. This is from where that occurs. You have modified shoots depending upon, shoots are mostly for support for the leaves. But sometimes, depending upon the function and where the plant is from, or needs of reproduction, you wind up having some modified shoots here, modified stems, like cacti, for instance. A cactus has a fleshy stem in order to store water. You have stems that are able to store carbohydrates. That is what we would call a tuber. As far as reproduction-wise, like stolons, this is how raspberries reproduce. Those stems actually are horizontal, go horizontal on the ground and arise in new plants. Rhizomes are those stems that produce new plants underground. And then you have some thorns on stems in order to provide protection from them. Leaves are the major photosynthetic organ of the plant. And just like stems and just like roots, you have many variations on a theme in order to maximize the amount of photosynthesis that can take place. As far as certain parts of the leaf, the major part of the leaf, the flat part. Now there are needle-like leaves, as you see, but we would refer to that as the blade. The quote-unquote stem of the leaf, where it attaches, we would refer to that as a petiole. You can have simple leaves, and you see that's just a one-leaf entity. Compound leaves, you have little leaflets on a stem. You can have doubly compound, as you see there in C. You have needle-like leaves. Needle-like leaves are those like on most of your gymnosperms, like your pine and your fir. And these are adaptations. They're true leaves, but they're adaptations that in areas that are dry and or cold, in that like the surface area of a leaf, like when you see a typical leaf to the left, there's a lot of surface area to maximize photosynthesis, but you also lose a lot of water this way. And in a needle-like leaf, you have a reduced surface, so you don't lose as much water if it's from a dry area. But then you also have the trick in if it's a cold area, you have a lot of snow. If you have a broad leaf, it catches the snow and then makes those branches break off. So when snow falls on needle-like leaves, it just kind of falls right through. I recall they say one of the most expensive storms in the Lehigh Valley was, I'm going to say maybe 5 to 10 years ago, was a snowstorm that happened on Halloween. And the reason it was so expensive is because the snow fell and many of the leaves were still on the trees. They hadn't fallen off yet. And you had a lot of tree damage, a lot of downed trees, a lot of broken limbs on power lines, because the branches just weren't accustomed to that much weight that the leaves were, with the snow falling on the leaves. Pretty cool, all these different variations of leaves. Of course, the main feature being to maximize photosynthesis. But you have leaves that aid in, like tendrils that aid in climbing. You have leaves that store water, leaves that store food. You can attract pollinators. You have leaves like in pitcher plants that trap insects. And you have some leaves that actually collect soil. So you do have lots of variation on this theme as well. As far as transport and resource acquisition, a little closer look at the leaves here. Now on the surface of the leaf, you have what are called stomata. And what stomata are they're basically openings. They're openings or pores in the leaf that are sided by two guard cells. And those guard cells open or close depending upon the needs of the leaf. And the leaf exchanges water vapor as well as gases like carbon dioxide and oxygen from the atmosphere. And again, depending upon how much of this activity takes place, depends upon whether those guard cells are open or closed. We mentioned transpirational pool as far as the release of water vapor in the air that in the leaves through the stomata that causes that vacuum effect to pool water up to the top of the tree. But then in the process of photosynthesis, you have to bring in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, as well as release oxygen as a result of the process of photosynthesis, all which takes place through the stomata. Oh, right. I guess I should have gone to this slide, right? As far as the xylem sap and transpirational pool, now I've explained that twice. But the other aspect to transpirational pool, as far as creating that vacuum effect, is that, as you recall from Bio 1, water molecules have a really cool trait in that they're sticky, so they stick to one another, and so that allows water molecules to kind of pool up on one another for a transpirational pool to take place. As far as phloem sap, as kind of briefly introduced, with phloem, what has to happen is during photosynthesis you have these sugars that are made and other nutrients that are made, or other sugars, other molecules, and they need to be taken throughout the plant. So the phloem sap transports these materials to wherever it's needed. But then in the wintertime, those sugars then settle and form starch. And when the plant needs to regrow in the spring, phloem sap then flows up the plant as it breaks down starch into glucose molecules to enable the plant to have energy before photosynthesis can take place, in order for it to grow and develop those particular leaves. And just some kind of fun little asides as far as plant variation with anatomy and physiology. You have epiphytes. These are types, sometimes you refer to them as, they're not parasites because they just grow on another plant, but they don't parasitize the plant they grow on, like Spanish moss. Parasitic plants actually do tap into the transport system of the living host. Like mistletoe is considered a parasitic plant. And then you have carnivorous plant, which is really cool because photosynthesis can take place in carnivorous plants, but what they lack is the nitrogen from the soil. And so they have evolved in order to obtain nitrogen in different ways, that is somehow trapping and breaking down insects or other living material and absorbing the nitrogen from that. Now, there are plant hormones. We animals have hormones that initiate different processes that occur in our body, and so do plants. Phototropism is the action of tropism is a movement, but this is the movement of plants towards a sun source, and it's auxin that is responsible for that, in the way that it's a plant hormone that will make the cells grow faster on one side of the plant, so it bends towards the light. Gravitropism is another example. That is that plants will grow their roots will grow towards gravity, and the stems will grow away from gravity. Like, for instance, like an experiment that was done on a space shuttle is where there's zero gravity. When you grow plants in zero gravity, the roots and the shoots don't really know how to orient themselves. So that's a pretty interesting example of gravitropism non-gravitropism, I should say, because there's no gravity there. And these are just some different plant hormones that are important. You have abscisic acid and auxins and brasinosteroids, cytokinins, ethylene, and gibberellins. The abscisic acid maintains seed dormancy and winter dormancy and closes stomata. Auxins are the ones that promote the stem elongation, as we saw in phototropism. Adventitious root initiation and fruit growth, inhibit axillary bud outgrowth and leaf abscission. Brasinosteroids promote stem and pollen tube elongation, promote vascular tissue differentiation. Cytokinins inhibit leaf senescence, promote cell division and axillary bud outgrowth and affect root growth. Ethylenes promote fruit ripening and leaf abscission, inhibit stem elongation and gravitropism. And gibberellins promote seed germination, stem growth, and fruit development, break winter dormancy, and mobilize nutrient reserves in grass seeds. All right, we're going to stop there, and the next one we're going to do is we'll have another lecture on plant growth, part 2. So I'll see you later.